Wow!
Good evening.
Now, I'll get things out of the way to start with. I do work at Microsoft, and I am using one of these.
Oh my God.
Oh my goodness, yes. I know. But it's running Vista, and Server, and OS X, and Ubuntu, and stuff. Yeah, exactly. It's a good job this hasn't been oh. Bearing in mind you've all given up your evenings, as I have, I think it's probably fair to say that you're all into your technology. I've been at Microsoft nearly 6 years, and it's very easy to get stuck in an ivory tower. So as well as liking the design of the hardware, I chose it would be good to dip my toe into OS X because I don't know the first thing about it. When I was in the shop trying to get to grips with it, the first thing I wanted was a shell. Found Bash, okay, life wasn't so bad. But it's an interesting experience. As I say, I work at Microsoft. My job is to try and help people like yourselves, particularly the IT pros amongst you, get more from the features that Microsoft have built into operating systems and applications. I focus on security, management, and I'm very interested in green IT and also in virtualization as well. James O'Neill is the lead for virtualization in the UK. I defer to him most of the time. But if you look at things like security, is virtualization good or bad for security? Counts both ways. Management, very quickly you get into virtualization being a hot topic. So there's places where we cross over. I'm part of a team of 4. Andrew Fryer focuses on data. So SQL, BI, and how do you integrate between SQL and Oracle and all the rivals of Microsoft. Viral focuses on collaboration, so typically Groove, SharePoint, Roundtable, Live Meeting, and the competitors for those technologies too. Eileen, as you may have come across, Eileen Brown, she focuses on messaging and mobility. So Exchange, Windows Mobile, and anything in that space from Arch Rivals as well. I think I've got everybody. Oh, and James, as well as virtualization, does platform. So the server, client, anything core on the OS isn't covered by the other pieces. Of course, security is kind of interesting because it crosses across database security, platform security, mobile security. So we end up collaborating on lots of these different areas. If you want to follow me on the web or have conversations about any of the stuff that I might make you think about tonight, feel free to email me, Stephen with a ph.lam at Microsoft. Oh, I'm talking absolute rubbish. Hopefully I won't do that for the whole talk. If you want to email me, I'm stephen.withaph.lam@microsoft.com. If you want to read the blog, type in my name into whatever search engine you use and it comes up top with the blog. I write about any of the topics I've mentioned. I'm not shy if you put comments on there. I will post them, but I do moderate my comments. I need to stop comment spam particularly. So during this talk, what I'm keen to get across is information about network access protection. That's a feature of Windows Vista, Windows XP Service Pack 3, and also Windows Server 2008. Now, I've mentioned some other platforms, and I'm sure you've got experience and maybe even work with other platforms sometimes as well. Network access protection does not stop you using other platforms and talking to systems that do use NAP. It's very important to be aware of that. Some people spread fear, uncertainty, and doubt that Microsoft's saying you have to run Vista or you have to run XPSP3. If you go to port 25, port and then 25 as the numbers, .technet.com, you'll get to the Microsoft Open Source Testing Lab. Yes, we have got one. They've got 55 different versions of Linux in labs testing how do you interoperate things like NAP, things like IPsec, things like IPv6. Any of the things that become core in our OS, we have to be able to interoperate. The teams that work there are quite interesting because they're not jazzed about Microsoft stuff typically. They work at Microsoft to try and get Microsoft to understand the things they are passionate about. So there's some interesting pieces there. If only security was this straightforward. Now, some of you who've seen me talk before might have seen me use this picture before. I took this while on Salisbury Plain in a Jeep, doing a Jeep safari. It's called Wessex Safaris. A friend of mine's got a Jeep, and foolishly he let me drive. I stopped when I saw this sign. I saw it 2-3 times and just had to take a photograph. The problem is, for security, most people don't understand it. It's the thing that gets in the way. It's the thing that they don't quite understand why they're supposed to do various things. I'm a believer it should be a very different experience. We need effective security. If people understand why they're supposed to lock their screen, if they understand why they're supposed to have complicated passwords, if they understand that instead of having weird key combinations, they could just have a sentence of something that's funny or rude or whatever kind of sparks their memory, that's actually quite a good password, a passphrase. So trying to get those ideas that security is something that should enable you to do more with less risk. That's a very different message from the message that most security people give of no you can't. Because if you say no you can't, people will do it anyway. They'll typically just find a way to do it. If you give them a prescribed way of doing something, then chances are they may do that if it makes sense. If you've sat in their shoes and worked as they work and seen why what you're asking them to do makes no sense and found a way to make it make sense, it's much more likely people will do what you want. Think about your network. Where's the boundary? Some people still think that in the building is the safe environment. Now, I've mentioned this for years and years and years, as maybe it's becoming more and more obvious now. But I use multiple different devices. Smartphone, lightweight laptop, more powerful laptop, machines all over the place. I switch between them. So where's the boundary? I use wireless interfaces, I use wired interfaces. I work in client sites, I work at home, I work in cyber cafes perhaps. I work in hotels, I work goodness knows where. I've got a 3G card, I use that wherever. The boundary is very hard to define these days. The only safe place is saying the data itself. Now, after you've just had all that healthy pizza, here's something similar. Is that healthy? I don't think I need to educate people on what's healthy or not. I've been to West Cornish Pastico 3 times this week, so I'm not in a good position to talk. Lamb and mint pasties, I love them. Life on the road, exactly. Is that healthy?
That's cool.
Looks more like a gremlin, doesn't it? What about that? Is that a safe place to go and use the internet? Maybe. How many of you are allowed to use internet cafes or unmanaged machines to access corporate email? Mind give me a show of hands. Right. Now, I've mentioned this lots of times in the talks I've been doing over the last 6 to 8 months. If you don't have a reason to trust the machine that you're using, to trust that it's been managed properly, isn't riddled with spyware tools, screen scrapers, keyboard loggers, be they hardware or software, I personally wouldn't be accessing sensitive information from those environments. Sometimes you just need to get stuff done, and sometimes you maybe choose, I'm not quite sure, but I'll do it anyway. Security, of course, is about risk. Sometimes you just need to get the job done, and there isn't a secure way to do it. Is that a safe place to use the internet? Looks kind of nice. Apparently it's in Paris. Nice comfy looking chairs. Again, same issue. Just because it looks nice doesn't mean it's secure. What about this? Is this healthy? You're probably thinking, well, yeah, of course it is. Guy in a suit with a reasonable looking laptop, sat in a street corner late at night, he's probably going to get mugged if nothing else. From a technical point of view, though, if he's accessing my corporate network and he's coming in through maybe a 3G card or wireless point, I need to know that that machine meets corporate policy before I can deal with things like Sarbanes-Oxley and the kind of legislation that says I need to have due diligence control over the machines. He wants to work somewhere random. Should I stop him? Depends on the policy and the risk, but I'd suggest ideally you should let him work where he wants to work. If he wants to risk getting mugged, as long as he's got BitLocker on there, I'm pretty happy. That's just a bias, but we should enable our people to work where they want, when they want, and how they want, and only stop them where there's actually a real risk of something bad happening. I will make this more technical, don't panic. I put that in twice accidentally. Network access protection is principally about having managed machines that should meet corporate policy coming into an environment through remote access, so maybe VPN, maybe some of you have still got dial-up. I know it does exist out there. Hopefully not, but some people certainly still use that. Maybe they're coming into the office. They've been on holiday for a while, perhaps not taking the laptop with them. I know you probably all take yours to the beach, but some people don't do that. The machines may not have all the security updates. Maybe they've missed them because the machine was powered off when the update came in because they're on holiday. Maybe they're coming in through wireless access, be they in your office, be it somewhere remote, All these different vectors, ideally, I want to be able to make sure that the machine is healthy before I allow it into my network. Be it wired, wireless, remote, local, don't care. So network access protection in a nutshell is about saying, this is what we regard as healthy. These are the core security controls that should be active in this particular way. Make sure that that's the case before I allow corporate access to my network. We're not focusing on Windows mobile phones or any other mobile phones. There is a technology that we've got in that space that's maybe starting to come over here, which is System Center Mobile Device Manager, what was codenamed Yona. That's a totally different subject. That's about managing the device, and it kind of is tangential. And you may see that there's a crossover in that space. We're principally talking about people with laptops. It can work just the same with desktops or servers, but focus primarily on laptops. Think about them being managed machines, so they should meet policy. You're dealing with exceptions. You're not doing a full security assessment before you let them in. If any of you are into security, you might think that's a great idea, but your users will pretty quickly get fed up of the 10 minutes it takes to get the machine checked out. So it should just be a quick check, let them in if everything's good. What we want to avoid, though, is people having massive help desk costs. We don't want the user who's been on holiday and quite rightly not got the latest updates, the latest configuration changes. We don't want them being locked out. What we want is the machine to just magically fix itself. Now, we can't quite do the magical bit, but we do provide the means to fix them. Microsoft call that remediation. Fancy term, but basically just means it fixes itself. Something else that's important to understand is that you're not restricted to managed machines. Start thinking about managed machines, but actually it can work for unmanaged machines too. Now I might be going slightly too fast. I know some of you are thinking, show me some tech, but just bear with me. I was explaining to somebody a little bit about blogging recently, and I made the mistake after 20 minutes of bringing up Twitter. I blew their minds. It was a really big, bad idea. And I don't want to be doing this now. I'm not trying to patronize you. But focus on that for managed machines. But let me just give you the other side. I'm working at home. I've got my own laptop, my own desktop, whatever it is. I still want to access the corporate infrastructure. So rather than just saying no, my machine might actually meet part of your policy by coincidence. Your policy might just say, have the latest updates in the machine, have a firewall turned on, have an antivirus, have a spyware, and that's it. So your users' machines might meet policy anyway. So you can have a series of policies, one that says if the machine's healthy, another that says if the machine doesn't understand what NAP is, because it's on a platform that maybe doesn't have support for it yet, or it's an old version of Windows or something like that, and another policy for saying the machine doesn't meet all of policy, but it meets some of the core parts. And you can restrict the routing of the machines based on those different groupings. That's why I say you can have policy for a machine that doesn't understand anything about NAP. You can say, still give it access to these resources over here. Something else that's really important to understand about NAP is it's not just about Windows updates, it's not just about Windows Firewall and all the Microsoft stuff. It's a core part of the network stack from end to end. You can make firewall decisions, IPsec decisions. You can make application type decisions based on whether the client machine has proved its identity if you can use IPsec, proved its health status in either case. You can be very, very specific. I'll show you the UIs and we'll go into some detail on this. But just setting the scene. So we're covering wired, wireless, remote, all the different possible scenarios there for laptops, making sure they meet the core parts of policy. If you've got a third-party security product, maybe it's an antivirus product, for example, it can absolutely be checked out in exactly the same way as we can do the Microsoft one. We've got something called SHAs, System Health Validators. It's been a long day. A client piece you put on the machine, the third party writes basically an extension to NAP to say check these things. It also gets loaded onto the server so the administrators can say these are the things we want to check. I'll show you this in the UI. There's a whole bunch of bits that go with this. We've also replaced something called IAS, Internet Authentication Service. That's been a feature of Windows 2000 server, Windows 2003 server as well. And once upon a time, Microsoft's NAP technology was not going to play nicely with Cisco's Network Admission Control, or NAC. So if anyone's feeling a bit sleepy, we've got NAP and NAC and Microsoft and Cisco. Anyway, we re-architected such that we replaced the Internet Authentication Service, which dealt with radius requests, remote connections coming in, with a Network Policy Server, or an NPS. The NPS does everything that IAS did. I'm not trying to confuse you, I promise. Deals with remote requests coming in. It also, the way we use it here is we deal with requests from wired and wireless in the same way. We push it through the same mechanism if you use NAP. And it's able to defer to a Cisco radius server, or the Cisco radius server can defer to our radius server, which is what the NPS does as well. So the two can defer to one another. You don't have to have one at the top versus the other one. So if you roll out NAP, and then you want to add NAC, or vice versa, that's all good. Something else that the NPS does is, as well as deciding should this client request be allowed, it also deals with the health side of things. So we've decided that you're an authenticated user on a device that we're allowing based on its type, and then we're going to say, well, does it meet the core parts of policy? So there's two areas of policy we look at in the interface. This will become clearer when I bring up the interface. So do we let the request come in? Yes, no. Does the machine meet policy? Yes, no. And then we base our routing on those questions. Everyone happy with that? Yeah? Again, I'm desperate trying not to patronize, but I'm trying to give you enough to make sense of it all as well. I've blogged loads about NAP. Absolutely masses of posts I've done on NAP, probably 20, 30 posts. I've linked lots of documents and videos and things that if you want to go off in one direction, like, I'm a dev guy or lady, how do I extend NAP to work for me? I've written about that, and I've linked to people who know masses about this stuff. It's all published stuff. It's not hard to extend it. There are people extending this already for Linux, Apple Mac, whether it's running Vista or OS X, that's all good. So we want people to use this stuff. So let's look pretty picture-wise how it works, then I'll go into the demo. So we get access requests coming in. This could be through DHCP. So I'm on your network, I've plugged in, or I've got access through the wireless network. Give me an IP address. Now this is kind of interesting. If you've got someone who's brought a machine into your network that can't authenticate to either a domain or whatever else you authenticate to, it won't get any further than this potentially. Now IPsec and NAP are complementary. There's cases where you'd use one or the other or both. But the machine makes a request by one means or another. Wired, wireless, remote, local, doesn't matter. Those requests basically take the form of a radius request. The health status is then sent through to the network policy server as a radius request. The NPS validates the current health policy based on a policy server. If the machine's compliant with the policy, it's allowed to route into the network. Now, each of the pieces on the diagram are just configuration options for Windows Server 2008 on the back end. You can put the whole lot on one box if you want to. I've kind of been pushing it a bit today before I came here, because my poor old Air with 2 gig of RAM is running all the components here. When I did the demonstration for the Windows Server launch in Birmingham, I had an 8 gig machine with 4 cores doing the same demo I'm going to try and show you here. I thought it was kind of an interesting challenge to try and cut it down as far as I could. If it's not compliant, we can then still let the machine route to an area of the network that we're regarded as less sensitive. Things that could be in there could be things like remediation servers. So my machine doesn't meet policy, why don't we let it fix itself if possible? Particularly if it's a machine that we've got administrative control over. So we couldn't maybe do this for the home user server or someone coming into your environment that's not part of your organization. But we can certainly do it for our employees and our managed machines. The remediation server can be lots of different things. In the demo I did on the launch, and that I've got pieces of online, I showed that you could have a full-front security server, a Microsoft product. You could have a System Center Configuration Manager product. But you could equally well have any rival to those technologies as well. They can easily be extended to do this stuff. Are there any questions at this stage? No? So everyone still looks awake, so that's always good. I mentioned it's complementary with IPsec. How many of you have come across IPsec? Okay, quite a few of you. IPsec, we've been able to do this since Windows 2000. Server 2003 had functionality that was okay, but it was really hard to administer, same as Windows 2000. IPsec on its own is something that's much, much easier with Server 2008 and or Vista. It's also NAP aware. Those who haven't come across IPsec, and I think it's only a couple of you, think about it as something where my machine can digitally prove it's a member of a certain trust group. And I can define a policy to say, if the machine's not one of our sales machines, don't let it talk to any other sales machine. Optionally, you can encrypt the traffic as well. Most people who do IPsec try and do both straight out of the box. They get a massively complicated environment, support nightmare, complexity nightmare, but it's really secure. Typically stops being used quite quickly or costs you a lot of money. I'd strongly encourage you, get the machines to authenticate themselves only. And then you can choose to encrypt specific cases where it makes sense. If you want to know more about IPsec, I've written quite a lot about it on my blog, the search for IPsec. Microsoft.com/IPsec is a really good place to look as well. I've linked to documents saying how do you do IPsec with NAP. I'm not going to go into depth on that, but I've written about that too. I talked about trust groups with IPsec. It's not a group within Active Directory, it's just a logical group. At Microsoft, we suffered with Slammer. We suffered with Slammer not because of our managed machines, but because of people like me who got demo boxes on the network that didn't necessarily have the latest security updates on, didn't necessarily have the latest policy on. We had people in support who'd got machines in the corporate network. Those machines were replicating customer problems. Therefore, they weren't even on the same version of the operating system. They weren't properly configured because they didn't need to be. Developers writing new stuff. This was all on the same network, wired or wireless. There were some VLANs, but simplistically speaking, think of it as all being on the same. We subsequently implemented IPsec based on domain membership to say, these are the development machines, these are the support machines, this is everything else. We've written a paper on this. This is all on the Microsoft website. We actually split into 8 different groups. And if you think about it, my machine doesn't need to be able to talk to the support machines. So right down at layer 3 in the network stack, it will not talk to any other machine unless there's an exception in the rules or it's in the same trust group. So if you wander into Microsoft facility like this one and somehow hack the wireless network or find a port, plug in, somehow get through that stuff, my machine still won't talk to your machine because you won't be able to prove your membership to the same group unless you break lots of other things. I'm just going to flick through these because I'm keen to show you the stuff. I'll publish slides and you're welcome to look through that or ask questions through email or blog comments if you want to, or grab me afterwards if you're particularly interested. So those are the slides. What I'm going to do now is, actually, those with good eyesight can see my machine's saying it needs a certificate to join the wireless network. I'm not logged in with a domain account right now, so I can't do wireless because it can't prove its identity. It shouldn't be able to prove its identity. So that's a normal message on my machine at the moment. If I was to log in with my domain account, the machine would prove its identity, it would also do IPsec, and it would all be good. But I'm perhaps digressing slightly too far. Here's my Vista machine. So this is a Vista virtual machine running on my Vista host machine. What I'm going to do is just do a couple of quick things. So firstly, at the bottom of the screen, and I appreciate it's a little bit small, I've got the icon showing my network connectivity. And I've got a warning triangle next to it. I've deliberately made this machine fail the policy check. If I click on the icon, it says network access may be limited. Okay, why is that then? Click on network requirements. This works in XP Service Pack 3 and Vista and Server 2008. And as I say, it's been extended for Linux and for Apple Mac. So here's the interface. It's telling me I've got something called a Windows Security Health Agent, so an SHA, not an SHV that I said earlier. That was just nonsense. And it's saying there's some kind of problem with this agent. I'm not meeting the policy here. I've got an agent for System Center Configuration Manager. That's all good. It may have had a problem, it may have been out of compliance, but it's fixed itself automatically if that was the case. Same's true for my Forefront SHA. There are 80 third-party companies who've written extensions that do this kind of thing. 80. It's not a new thing. So I know that the problem's with my Windows SHA. So what I'm going to do is have a look on the policy server side and see what's actually been set. This is a Server 2008. Happens to be an Enterprise Edition. That's not a requirement, just happens to be. I've gone into the Network Policy Server. Now the thing that scares me about all this stuff is we don't charge any extra for it. There's no licensing requirement for doing network access protection. Nowhere in the stack. You could argue it's trying to pull through you using System Center Configuration Manager, which is a product. You could argue it's trying to pull through Forefront. You could argue it's trying to pull through people having domain membership. But they're the only ways in which you'd pay extra for this stuff. So the Network Policy Server is just a role I add to my Server 2008. What I've got here is I've got two different areas of interest. I've got policies. These are my radius connection request policies, how to deal with those. And I've got my network access protection policies. So first let's look at my network policies. Double click. What it's saying is these are the requirements for gaining access to the resources, full stop. It's nothing to do with is the machine healthy, it's saying should I allow the request, period. If the answer is yes to this stuff, then you get to the policy piece. So we've said it can come in, and as a minimum it can go to my restricted area, but can it go to the more sensitive areas of the network? Which is where the second piece comes in. So I'll just read some of this because I appreciate it's pretty small. So policy state, the policy is enabled. It's got a descriptive name. I want to grant access if all of the other pieces are good. What kind of policy access server have I got? I've got Health Registration Authority. So this is where the machine is going to go to find out what to do with the request. I've got some conditions here. A series of policies I can link to enforce. I've got some constraints. What kind of authentications I'm going to require. How long the connection can be maintained with that activity. All kinds of radius-y kind of stuff that's not very new if you're used to IAS. All the Cisco alternatives. Then some overriding settings. Again, I can specify vendor-specific attributes and all the radius-y kind of stuff that you've been able to do for a long time. With my health policy, which security health validators am I forcing to be used to be assessed against? In this particular case, I'm saying the Windows Security Health Validator, not the Config Manager one, not the Forefront one. As I mentioned before, you can put any of the other 80 ones in here just by adding them to the server. Let's see the definition that's being used for that. So I'm now going to the Network Access Protection section just down below, and I've got a corresponding item here, the Windows Security Health Validator. So we know that this is being used by the policy. What do we do if the machine's non-compliant? What do we do if it's compliant? It can be very, very specific. Let's go to configuring it. So for the platforms that we know of, in this case I've got Vista and XP, but as I say, if you'd extended this or use a third-party extensions, you see other platforms listed here as well. We want a firewall to be enabled. Notice it doesn't say which firewall, it's just a firewall. It's actually any firewall that will integrate with the security center on Vista or XP. So we're not specific, it doesn't matter, as long as there's a firewall working, that's perhaps good enough. An antivirus turned on, that's not being required. But I've got spyware protection being forced here. The reason that my client is out of compliance is because I don't have any anti-spyware set up. It's out of date, it's not active. That's why it's failing. In the event log I can see full detail on the client side and the server side as to why the check failed. But I know from experience, because I set this up, why this is failing. Automatic updating is enabled. That's a requirement of the policy as well. So let's have a look back at the client side. Okay, a couple of things I'm going to do. I'm going to go into the security center on my Vista client. You see here my malware protection is out of date, so I'm failing the check there. My anti-spyware is out of date, so I'm failing the check there. Let's go into Windows Update. My policy stipulates that Windows Update has to be active as well. I'm going to go to Change Settings. I'm going to say Never Check for Updates. I'm going to click on OK. It's a security event, so I'm being asked to give my permission for this to happen. I take my hands off. I don't have any funny scripts running or anything weird. But pretty much by the time I go back in there to change settings, it's already flicked back to the right setting. So I said, don't check for updates. The client saw that. It checked with the policy server. It knew that that was wrong, and it flicked it back for me automatically. That's a policy choice. I don't have to fix it. I could leave it out of compliance. The client machine in the box here in the sys tray, assuming this didn't fix quite so quickly, let's say it's something that took longer, maybe it's a configuration manager change or a forefront change or some third party, I'd see the dialog box saying, your machine's out of compliance, this is what you need to do to go fix it. Or it would fix automatically, but it would take a few moments. This change is so quick that I don't even get the dialog box come up. If you want to play with this stuff yourself, let me just give you a quick trick. So I'm running a command shell as administrator. I run a command called napstat, N-A-P-S-T-A-T. I have blogged about this, so you don't have to write notes if you don't want to, but just so you've seen this. Give it a moment. You have to run this as administrator. If you run without administrator, it just doesn't work, but you don't get an error message back. Kind of confusing. I get an icon at the bottom from running napstat. It just forces that interface to come up. And I can see what I saw before when I went to, I've got limited routing Y, I get back to the same place. What's the policy on the client? Why do I fail the policy? That's back to just what I showed you before. So that's napstat from the command line, N-A-P-S-T-A-T. Okay, well, let's give my client a chance of meeting the policy. Now, like all good demonstrations, I'm going to cheat. Perhaps that's not all good demonstrations, but anyway. So what we're going to do is go into the system health validator on the server and change the policy to remove the need for anti-spyware. Because I'm not going to go and fix the anti-spyware in front of you. Take me a few minutes, it's not relevant. Microsoft guy says anti-spyware is not relevant. Click on OK. So that's now all set. Theoretically, if I run napstat again, in fact, this has already picked up a change to the policy. Chances are it will probably now let me root. Sometimes it's necessary to, if you want to give it a kick, to log off and log on again. Let's just see if it's done it already. Now the piece that I'm missing is I don't have the web server virtual machine running. Because the full demo is you try and browse to the home page of your HR web server, which is the mock-up page on a web server. And the web server's been configured to only allow healthy clients to actually access the web server. That's the bit that I'm missing. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just to force this to go a little bit quicker, I'm just going to log off and log on again on the client. It's not a requirement of NAP, but it just forces things to happen a bit more quickly. Now my Vista client's running in 0.5 gig of RAM. So it's not quite as quick as it could be, but my server's running in 0.5 gig of RAM as well. What's that? It has a very secure password. That was a convenience one only. Okay. It's being updated, it says. Not quite sure why it's being updated, because I think it should meet policy by now.
You didn't apply the change in,
Doesn't actually have an apply button, that's why.
it didn't have an apply button, you just clicked OK.
I'm an idiot, thank you. It flicks that back automatically. Yeah, but I haven't required. I've obviously made a mistake, but I haven't required Windows Update. Let me just try this once more. It should have just been, ta-da, look, isn't that great? What was this afternoon? The problem with NAP is you're adding complexity. Okay, so my Defender isn't up to date, but that isn't a requirement of my policy. If I go back to here and here, I've only got two requirements, the firewall being turned on and automatic update. So it should just be automatic. Let me just make sure I don't have any other requirements. Nope, those are turned off. I could do the good old-fashioned reboot the client, but I definitely shouldn't need to do that. When I was playing with this, it's trying to check for updates to the policy. Let me just reboot it anyway. I wouldn't normally have to do this. Cheap joke, sir. Are there any questions on what NAP does while I'm rebooting this? Yep. Okay. You are. The question that's being asked is complicated. And there's a whole bunch of possible answers. I'll try and break it down. If I've got a large environment using Cisco, and let's for example say that it's using network and mission control. So it's a Cisco solution, they're high-end Cisco switches. I believe there's an extra license for using that functionality. But let's say you've got that environment and you want to integrate it with this, that's straightforward. Because what happens is the request comes in from 8021X, which is where the Cisco piece comes in. That's a valid point of entry into NAP. The Radius request would come in from their policy server, and then we could add in, is the machine healthy? So it's basically just deferring the request up to us. The question you're asking specifically, I may not have fully understood, but you started talking about certificates. Do I have to change certificates? We give certificates to devices so they can prove the IPsec membership typically. That doesn't have any difference with using NAP. So if you use IPsec separately, or IPsec plus NAP or NAP only, you just have to layer those apart and break them down individually. The best way to use NAP is to use it with IPsec. I'd like all the devices to prove their digital identity to me as the point of entry before I let those machines do anything on my network. I'm a strong fan, a big fan of IPsec. I hate IPsec for encryption because it just adds unnecessary complexity typically. There are cases where it makes sense to do that too. But just saying I want only managed machines to access my network, I would say is a really good thing. But it does add some complexity. Predominantly, you need the machines to be able to get a digital identity. So what I often recommend is you have a Microsoft certification server, which is just optional install of Windows Server 2000, 2003, 2008, and you have an auto-issuance policy for IPsec requests. So basically any device that wants to prove its identity can say to the server, just sign this for me, will you? Fine, thank you very much. For IPsec, it often makes sense just to do that automatically. We don't charge extra for the certificates. We don't charge extra for the certification authority. We don't charge extra for any of that stuff. I mention that because some alternative solutions require you to buy certificates. Therefore, that becomes very expensive if every single device in your network has to prove its identity. At Microsoft, we had a weird experience. So we as individuals are allowed to install and run pretty much what we want and manage the machines as we choose. Therefore, there was not much of an imperative to join domains. We started off with IPsec when we implemented it on a reporting basis only. And I'd encourage you, if you do NAP, to do the same thing. Don't start locking people out, but just produce reports as to who would have been locked out and why. What percentage of your estate are, quotes, healthy? Is your definition of healthy too hard to meet? Do you have to have it as simple as have a firewall, nothing else, and then build it up? What we found with IPsec was that people started joining the domains because it was the easiest way to get the credentials automatically. I built this machine in about half an hour flat by just either booting off the network or putting a distribution DVD in. I joined it to the domain. That's something that is perhaps unusual, but Microsoft users are allowed to do. It's a policy decision. By joining the domain, my machine comes under the control of IPsec, group policy, basically becomes centrally managed and controllable. So there's kind of a trade-off there. This is my own personal laptop. I use it for business and non-business. The compromise I make is I need to join it to the domain to use wireless here, to be able to work remotely to do those kinds of things. So there's something in it for me by joining the domain. There's something in it for Microsoft by me joining the domain because they can meet the needs of corporate governance. They've got super user rights over my box. So it's a give and a get. And that's how I think security should be. But it's very, very easy for me now to do wireless, IPsec, all that stuff, because all I have to do as a user is join the machine to the domain. It automatically gets a digital identity from that point. It can then prove its identity for the wireless network. I can use my smart card with it. I can do NAP with it. I can travel to any Microsoft facility in any of 87 countries. And even if I suspend and resume it, all I do is log on once, then everything else is automatic. So it's a really good compromise for an ease of use and security. Let me see if this has worked. I'm really not quite sure what it was doing. Let's see if I can root. Looks like it's now in compliance. Let me try running napstat. Yeah, I've now got full rooting. Now, I'd say the demo is a bit slicker with a web server to go to that can prove I can browse the page or not. But I didn't think you'd need to see that because it's just pretty. Maybe I should be wanting it to be pretty having a Mac. I'll save you the jokes, it's okay. Let's run napstat. Yeah. I think there's some kind of delay going on as to why that wasn't quite updating as quick as it needed. But it's saying my machine now meets corporate policy. I can be very specific. The things I really like about NAP are you could have a whole bunch of third-party security products, management products, applications, and you can define policy centrally to say which bits are important for you to grant access to your network through wired, wireless, remote, doesn't matter. It's a really powerful technology. It does get quite complicated. It gets more complicated the more pieces you bring into play. If I was going to start doing network security, I wouldn't start with NAP. I'd start with get your users to use passphrases instead of passwords. I hate changing my damn password every Monday morning. It's a much better password than XYZ12356 that I can't remember. XYZ, no, you see, I can't remember it already. That's a better place to start. Get people to lock their screens is a better place to start. Then do things like IPsec. Get the machines to prove their identity by the virtue of them being in a domain. Put rules in to say if the machines that are trying to request access to me aren't members of the domain, tell them to get stuffed. That's a technical term, obviously. Then when you've done that, then start using NAP in reporting mode. And then start enforcing NAP. you can get some really interesting behaviors. Just using IPsec alone, I can stop any unmanaged machine getting onto my network to do anything useful. That's a really powerful statement. Using NAP as well, I can say, okay, let's make sure that the machines are up to date. Check for the latest security updates. Check for the specific button and widget you need to press in some obscure third-party product that's on the client. You can do that kind of stuff natively. All of the traffic for NAP, the NAP internal traffic is encrypted, it's digitally signed. It's a very long way away from what we did in Windows 2003 server, which was Quarantine. And Quarantine was a feature purely for routing remote access, which did the same basic thing of saying, Steve's coming in remotely, he's dialing in or VPNing in, does his machine meet policy? But it ran a script on the client to do that. You had to deploy the script to the client. The traffic wasn't encrypted. The data wasn't signed. So as an administrative level user, I could just spoof to say everything's fine here, just keep going. These are not the droids you were looking for kind of scenario you could do very easily as an administrator. That's not the case with NAP. So we remove the complexity, the administrative hassle and the expense that you had with Quarantine, and we bring in all of the other points of access to the network. And we make it available for all the third-party integration tools. If they can be seen from the security center, we can access them natively. If you choose to extend them to put an SHA in, then you can be as specific as you like on the client and say which things have to be active before you allow people to roam into your network. You could have a very large remediation server group, and they're the machines that any machine can access, regardless of its policy status. There's so much you can do with this, it's crazy. It works with IPv4, IPv6. It does most things that most people want to do in network security from a point of view of, does that box meet policy? Is it healthy? Think back to the burger scenario. We know that's not healthy, but we still eat those things. We know that we can't force all client machines necessarily to meet our security policy. But if we accept that, then we can define which machines they can route to. And that can give a reason for users to want to join the domain if you give as much administrative control as our users get. You've got partners, customers, people like that that maybe want to gain access to more things. Maybe you can create a new domain for them, give them access. Maybe you can have different levels of trust between your partner domains and your own domains. There's loads of stuff you can do. But NAP is throughout the entire network stack. Any questions?
Your system has validator and system has agent.
Yeah.
Agent runs on the client and validator runs on the server.
Yes.
Now, the interface between the validator agent asks the question whether the firewall is turned on or not. Now, my health validator will answer it's yes or no.
Yeah.
So is it the SHA, like, let's take Windows Firewall for an example. Is it the Windows Firewall process on a Windows XP going to answer, or is there some other process running on a client as a system health validator gets the response from a Windows Firewall and supply it to the health validator?
It's the latter.
So isn't it the same thing about that in Windows 2003 you can fool your script saying that everything is okay? Now since the process is running outside the process, you can just break it on a first point, because now you have an additional layer and you put live in between.
If you have admin rights on the client, you could, if you go to enough length, spoof it. So yes, you could, but then I could do all kinds of things as administrator. I own the entire box. So maybe my example wasn't quite accurate when I said that how this is better than Quarantine. Because yes, in both scenarios, if I'm an administrator, I can spoof anything I choose, but it's much more difficult. But we're not trying to protect against already compromised machines. We're not trying to protect against administrators. Because once I've got to administrative level, I can put a piece of software in there that sees everything you see and everything you type. That's game over. Nothing else is relevant at that point forward. Have you got a follow-on question?
So isn't it the good idea that rather than relying on an intermediate service between health agent and validator, you directly ask the service responsible for the answer? Let's say it's a Norton antivirus. Norton antivirus is extended my NAP with the network with the validator, and now I have an agent which is a Norton client itself, and itself answers rather than some third process running gets the response.
No, because that makes it more complicated for the third-party application. We're basically providing a platform on the client that understands how to talk to the network policy server and how to talk to system health agents. So we're trying to make it as easy as possible for third parties to integrate with this stuff. If you compromise the client piece of NAP, you've compromised the box anyway. We can go into deeper conversation if it's appropriate, because I'm sure it's not relevant for everybody. And there's also things that I've linked to on the blog, and I can dig out more if it helps answer your question as to exactly how it works under the hood. But simplistically, we want to make sure that the box meets policy before we give it access to our network. Locally, remotely, wired, wireless, doesn't matter. That's what NAP does. Remediation, I think, is a key part as well. I don't want to be told phone the help desk or come into the office if your machine doesn't meet policy. I just want it to fix itself. So you need to put some thought into what do we do if the MD can't gain access because his machine doesn't meet policy? What do we put in the remediation group? What are the automated mechanisms for bringing the machine into compliance? What's actually worth measuring in the first place? I personally think you should check as little as possible, have as few security controls as possible, while mitigating the risks that you're actually facing. Too many security people make life too complicated.
So, as far as I understand, the idea of NAP is to protect our network from unhealthy friends, not from enemies.
Nearly. So I'll try and restate what you said. The purpose of NAP is to protect our network from unhealthy friends, not to protect us from enemies. I'd say it's nearly true. It's to protect the machines on our network from unhealthy friends. The network itself is just bits of wire, bits of air, routers, things like that. And maybe I'm being pedantic, but it's the machines that are being protected using this. So we're controlling the routing of incoming devices as to where they can go, but it's actually the client machine and the server machines that are also running NAP that are actually going to enforce what's possible and what's not possible. Stopping bad guys or girls or whatever getting in, that's much more about access controls. So the first part of the policy, who do we let in? How have they authenticated? How does the machine prove its identity if you're going to use IPsec? That's how we stop the unauthenticated, inappropriate people coming in. What NAP doesn't do and what IPsec doesn't do is it doesn't stop a user installing some piece of junk code that opens the box up because it's insecurely written in the first place. That's a different problem, and it's a pressing problem. There are more machines in the UK that are compromised per capita than anywhere else in the world. We talk about botnets or robots, machines that are running code that are doing things that the users aren't aware of and perhaps aren't in the user's best interests. There are more bot-infected machines in the UK per capita than anywhere else in the world. Typically, in my experience, it's because people install anything that looks appealing without questioning who wrote it, what their motives were, and what the exposure might be. They're logged in as administrator or root or system or the equivalent too much of the time. Things like network access protection is not going to stop a stupid user. It's not going to stop a stupid administrator. It's not going to stop somebody who's written some code that does something that doesn't do what it says on the tin. So security is clearly a combination of all those things. But NAP is a powerful tool in the arsenal. Security is about people, process, and technology. That might be really obvious, but there are too many dumb security policies that have been written by someone who doesn't understand the jobs that the people do, written in a language that the people would never understand. It should be possible for your least technical, least security savvy user to go, this is dumb, and for someone to listen and either change it if it is dumb or explain it in plain sense, common English or whatever the language is, so they understand. In Microsoft, the reason that people are encouraged to lock their screens is A, it's good governance and good policy, but actually I go around explaining to users, do you know what I can do if you leave your machine unlocked? No, what? Well, I could put a backdoor in it and see everything you type and everything you see. Yeah, but you wouldn't do that, would you? No, I probably wouldn't do that, because I'd be breaking policy by using someone else's machine, even if they've been stupid enough to leave it unlocked. And that's a fireable offence at Microsoft. What I could do if I was prepared to ignore that slight problem is I can see how many stock options they've got, how much they earn, what the review grade was, what the review comments were, all kinds of things like that that they probably wouldn't want me to see.